Success leaves clues and you can accelerate your journey.
I'm super excited to be here with Jason, owners and operations leader at Collective Stays, starting from scratch. What would you do differently?
I would tell myself, have an abundance mindset and just go for it. All of the fears and things that you feel are too risky is just a knowledge barrier. So connect with people who've been there.
Let me just get this out there. But I think the problem is
when I talk about wanting to invest in real estate, I started to feel like I was faking it. I'm an imposter here. I need to actually start doing it.
I'm a big fan of self-education, but I also think there's a risk in overconsumption of education.
You got to be careful the stories you tell yourself.
There's opposite opinions on this. Robert Kiyosaki style mindset of start small so that you can learn the business, and then Grant Cardone, go 10x, go get 100 units minimum. Now that you've gone through that process, what would you say? Would you say start small? Would you say go big?
I'm going to give you the answer that you already know.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, real estate and hospitality. And we really aim to bring together entrepreneurs, operators, investors, founders, and leaders in the short-term rental and vacation rental space so they can tell us about their stories, the lessons that they have learned along the way, and maybe some of the mistakes they might have made along the way as well, so we don't have to make those same mistakes ourselves. Today, I'm super excited to be here with Jason. He's the owners and operations leader at Collective Stays. So he's actually someone that has a background in tech, in real estate, and then ended up, as many do, in property management. Just as one of those things that happens in life, and through M&A growth has managed to grow a portfolio to now a good chunk of properties under management. 60 plus is the number I have in mind. So very excited to have you on, Jason. Thank you for taking the time. First off, where are you taking the call from?
Hey, Sebastian, thank you so much for having me. I am taking the call from Oahu, Hawaii, on the west side of the island.
Amazing, Jason. Amazing. So listen, let's start with a little question with regards to, if you were starting all over again, right? So you know what you know today, but you're starting from scratch. Either what could you do differently, right? What would you do differently if you could change a mistake you made or take a different approach? Or what would you advise yourself if you were talking to the person that was first getting into this vacation rental property management space?
I think the thing I would tell myself when I first got started, which was, about 10 years ago, is have an abundance mindset and just go for it. All of the fears and things that you feel are too risky, it is just about a knowledge barrier, right? And so connect with people who've been there. Success leaves clues. And understand what you can learn from them to accelerate the process. When I started to do that, that's when I started to accelerate my real estate and investing and wealth building journey. But early on, you got to be careful the stories you tell yourself, right? And sometimes you have one small fear that grows into something larger, or you think something's risky and you don't put enough time to educate yourself. And it can hold you back. And I was on the sideline for 5 years, just listening to all the Bigger Pockets podcasts and reading all the real estate books, but not taking any action. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are in that position or have been in that position where you're just watching on the sidelines. And so take some action and surround yourself with people who are doing it or who have done it, because success leaves clues, and you can accelerate your journey if you do so.
Man, I love that. I wanna dig a little deeper if you don't mind. So abundance mindset, if you're too scared, it's because there's a knowledge gap. There's a few things there. Let's start with, what was holding you, what was making you hold back? Like what was the thing that for you was either a knowledge gap, or was it a fear, and how did you identify that something was holding you back in the first place?
Well, I think I knew that when I continued to talk about wanting to invest in real estate and not after 3 years hadn't taken any action, and it was getting close to 5 years, and I'm like, I got
Hmm.
to stop talking about it. I got to start doing it.
Hmm.
And listening every single day to Bigger Pockets, reading, a bunch of real estate books. And I started to feel like, like I was faking it, And I'm like, I'm an imposter here. I need to actually start doing it. And so that was, when I really realized that. But I think there's the more that you get involved and network and get into mentorships or masterminds and just surround yourself with people who are doing it, the more you open up some of those barriers that you didn't even know were there. So, for example, I was sitting there thinking the traditional route that I had to save 20%, buy a property traditionally, save some money, get another 20%, a few years, 3 to 5 years later, get another one. And that was going to be my path to eventually
Hmm.
getting 4 or 5 houses in 20 years.
Hmm.
Little did I know about, partnering with people on, JVs or, getting properties via, creative, ways, creative finance. And so there was just a whole plethora and this whole universe of real estate investing that was unlocked when I started to actually go out there and talk to people and ask the questions that I was scared to ask. Sometimes I think folks that are studying and the game, if you're a student of the game, but you're not actually playing the game, you can just get so lost in the studying of the game and you're afraid to ask the questions that you feel like you should know because you're studying so much. Kind of like when you're
Hmm.
a student and you're like, I don't want to ask the teacher the dumb questions, but the smartest people in the classroom are asking the dumb questions, right? Because they're
Hmm.
accelerating their learning curve. And so I do feel like, and I do know some people in my circles who are still on the sidelines and they're just afraid to ask those questions. And they'll like ask me on the side every few months, hey, I have this barrier, I have this question, and I help them through it. And I'm like, this could have been a 30-minute conversation. We could have knocked out 10 questions and you could have been well on your way, but you spread those questions out over 6 to 12 to 18 months and you're crawling and still on the sidelines. And so that was me. It takes one to know one.
Wow.
And I
That's such
just
a good
think,
point, man.
you know,
And there's
yeah,
also something I think I'm a big fan of self education and masterminds and coaching and like anything that's learning. I'm a big fan, but I also think there's a risk, to your point, in over consumption of education to the
for
point where
sure.
you feel like you're doing some, you feel like you're making progress, but in reality you're kind of seeing education as entertainment. Like it's now your
Yes.
alternative to Netflix, to be learning something. So you feel productive, you feel good about yourself, but are you doing something? I have, I have fallen in that trap for a long time as well, by the way. So how do you get through that?
It's I've had to learn, especially transitioning from corporate to entrepreneurship. I've had to learn more and more to trust my gut and understand when my intuition is telling me that you need to take action.
Mm.
And I think, I mean, we can get into corporate, a little bit later, but I think when the longer you are in a corporate environment or a large company environment, the less you are encouraged to trust your intuition.
Mm.
And so it was a muscle that I had to teach myself more. But really, at the end of the day, something simple is just got to have a balance of action and, knowledge.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, if you're just sitting there listening to all the different YouTubes and joining masterminds and going through all the courses and studying and all of that, but you're not actually taking action, what's it good for? It's Yeah, it's all about taking action for
So,
sure.
so let's talk more about you. So you're there. You probably were comfortable too, right? It's not like you hated what you did. I guess I don't know. You tell me, and then tell me a little bit of context of where you were at in your tech career, and then how did you manage to push through and get out of that cycle of just education and started getting into action.
Yeah, so I spent 15 years in tech as a product manager in various startups and mid-sized to large companies. So kind of had the full gamut of the tech experience. I worked in financial technology companies. I worked in fashion companies, fashion tech companies, fintech, and most recently was a director of product at Rocky Mortgage. And I would say that for about the last 5 years of my 15-year tenure, I was really my heart was shifting over to real estate and less in tech. But to your point, you know, the golden handcuffs made me very comfortable. I've got 3 kids, and we, are raising a family, and the 401k is building, and all of the benefits, and you're like, this is good. But yeah, started to it started to grow this like desire for me to do something more, and it actually was, and until I was able to actually get laid off. So
Mm.
I got laid off during an org change, and that was the first thought that came to my head when I got laid off was, this is my chance to go full time real estate.
Mm.
And so it was, I think the loyalty that I had to the companies and everything was something that was like holding me back. But when I finally got laid off during that time, I just said it's time to go. Right?
Mm.
It
Mm.
wasn't a second thought about it. And so, you know, divine forces and everything, and kind of pushed me towards that. And that's where I went. And so I jumped full time into real estate from there and never looked back.
I see, man. So tell me a little bit more about those first acquisitions, right? Just from the point of view of trying to understand. So you get laid off. At that point, had you already bought something? Like the timing of the early beginnings, or was it like you get laid off and then you go and buy?
Yeah, so I'd been adjacent to real estate my entire career, so in my life. So my mom's been a loan officer. My dad was a real estate agent. I was around real estate my entire life, and then I found myself in financial technology. Building software for mortgage loans and everything. So I was around it, but I
Mhm.
wasn't investing. And then when I got to Rocket Mortgage, there are obviously some amazing benefits for employee loans, and so I actually did get my first. Investment property, while I was at Rocket Mortgage. And I'd started there. It was actually an investment property here in Hawaii, and I lived in California at the time.
Or was that a
And so this was
vacation
in the
rental
middle.
property?
It was just going to be a long-term rental property.
Long term rental.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we got into it at the same time as the middle of the pandemic. We had come here to Hawaii to visit our family quite a bit. And in the middle of the pandemic, I was working here while I was visiting, and just decided, hey, let's move into our rental instead of renting it out. Let's just try Hawaii for a year. And so we ended up moving across the ocean to Hawaii, and moving into the rental for a year. And after a year, we bought another house here and decided we wanted to stay. But that was the first rental. Right around that time is when I was introduced to the world of creative finance and realized that there are more properties you can acquire with less money down. And so at that point, I had gotten a DSCR loan to get a property in the Las Vegas area, which was a furnished rental, but kind of went a little bit accelerated mode, beast mode on getting more properties, and acquired about 4 properties in about 5 to 6 months via creative finance, and really grew the portfolio at that point.
And was it seller financing? Was it what you did joint ventures? What was your go-to thing there?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. So I did a few. I did a couple of subject to
Okay,
assumptions. Right. I did one seller finance deal for a 2 unit, and a couple of them I did joint venture partnerships where I had other partners bring a lot of the capital, so that I would bring less of the capital to the table.
nice. So that abundance mindset kicked in once you had no choice, right? But to go get it. That's awesome. And then you were going to meetups, and you ended up connecting with your current partners that led to the whole vacation rental side of things. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, I was starting to go to meetups here in Hawaii. I went to my business partners now. I went to their meetup. They were hosting monthly meetups just to get people together, and we got to talking. And I just let them know about my journey. I was actually in the middle of like trying to figure out how to scale, and really how to forge my path as a full time real estate investor. And I mentioned to them that I was starting to grow a small portfolio of furnished rentals. I joined, Rob Ilt's mastermind, host camp for really learning how to really operate furnished rentals. And a light bulb just kind of went off at that point. They were like, hey, we have a dozen or so furnished rentals. They're currently managed by another company. What if we just start a company together to manage our own properties, our own portfolio? And once we get that operation going, we can potentially, scale it. But at the very least, let's just start a company to manage our own. And so that conversation was one of our first ones. And over the course of the next couple of months, we started to, you know, started to put the business models together and starting to put the business plan and just said, hey, this could work. And we launched it, just a couple months later. And that was a little over a year ago. So we just started with my 3 properties. They had about 12. So we had about 15 at the time that we slowly scaled up to in 6 months. And today we are at over 60 units.
Wow, that's impressive, man. And so, couple things there, right? What do you think led to you being, receptive to those collaboration opportunities? Because if you were with the lack of abundance mindset, maybe you would not have had the conversation. Maybe you would not have gone to the meetup. Maybe you would have kind of just not followed up on the thing. So let's start with do you think there's an element of the headspace you were at that allowed you to see the opportunity and follow through?
Yeah, my business partner Tristan says that. She was like, when I first met you, you were putting that energy out, like you wanted to go do something, and she felt that energy. So yes, it's 100% that, right? I'm an introvert. I get my energy when I'm by myself, and I don't like to go out and network a lot. But I do know that it's essential, especially in this business. And so when I do that, I flip the switch and I prepare myself for it. And when I'm going out to these meetups, I'm going number one with good intentions to just, meet people and see how I can add value, but also very intentional about I'm going to put energy out there that I want to collaborate. And I'm not going out there looking for a sale, but I'm looking out there to say, hey, how can I add value to you? And, is there somewhere where we can collaborate? And if you come in with those intentions, especially to different meetups and meeting different people, you never know what type of relationships you can forge. And I happen to forge some amazing relationships with other business partners and other partners that I've JV'd properties with. And in particular, my business partners today, which is Tristan and Kamahai, who have been some of my, one of the best partners I've been able to meet and deal with.
That's amazing, man. I love that. And just a little parenthesis on this. How do you force yourself, or not force yourself, but as an introvert, going to networking events? There's nothing that sounds more opposite to what you would enjoy, right? If you get energy from not being around people. What is it that leads you to at that point to say, you know what, I'm gonna force myself to do it? What was the force? What was the motivating force? Yeah.
I mean, the motivating force is really digging deep and understanding your why. And my why is building, a legacy and, generational wealth for my family. And so this is part of part of that deal. And so going out and meeting people is just one of the things, that's needed to reach those goals. And so understanding my why just makes it easier. And then tactically, it takes a lot of practice to be able to understand how to speak and interact. And so tactically, yeah, I'd scribble down a couple of topics of things I want to talk about, maybe even scribble down how I'm going to introduce myself. I always have a digital business card. I have a blink card so that, it's always something you can do to, meet someone instead of just handing them your card. You're pulling out your phone, you're kind of interacting to exchange information. And so tactically, having some things that you have in your hip pocket, where there is a digital business card or 2 or 3 questions that you want to ask people about, and whenever you see a real estate investor, it's like, hey, how, what are your latest projects? What are you looking to get into? What are your goals over the next 3 to 5 years? Having those few questions kind of in your hip pocket can open up a ton of conversations. And as talking to a lot of real estate investors, if all real estate investors just handed out their resumes and said, this is what I do, you would never really understand where the gold is at, because it's all about the things that they want to do or things that they've been thinking about in the back of their mind that create these partnerships, right? So, for example,
Mm,
you can meet somebody that's like, "Hey, I'm a multifamily investor, right? And this is all I do." Um, but when you get to talking to them, they say, "Hey, I actually have a few furnished rentals that I'm looking for someone to manage. Do you know anybody?" Right?
mhm.
Or hey, my father or my relative is trying to been wanting to get out of this house for a while and they want to flip it. Do you know anybody that wants to take over and flip a property? And you're like, maybe I don't, but I absolutely know my business partner does or someone else does. And so it's really in those conversations when you have those open-ended, questions and open-ended conversations where a lot of the interesting gold comes out, and real value and collaboration happens.
I love it, man. I love it. And so you guys start managing properties, and so you grew fast. There was an M&A component to that fast growth. Tell us about how that happened, but also what you learned from that process of actually acquiring a property like an operation so early on.
So just a funny story about that. My business partners, Tristan in particular, is like the ultimate manifester. And when we met and we started the company, I think it was like a few weeks in, she was like, once we get the operation going, we should just approach XYZ people and say, "Hey, I want to acquire your company." And one of those people, and it was the company that we ended up acquiring. And it was just something she said in passing, but verbalizing it, and then us having a small interaction about it, just kind of put it out there, and that ended up happening way faster than we thought. And so they had all of their properties under management under a current property manager, the property manager that they had at the time. He was a good friend, so they had a lot of trust with him, which was great. But as they started to pull their properties off and put them under collective stays, that property manager was like, "Hey, you're starting to pull all of your units off. How can I keep you on?" And they just said, "Unfortunately, we started a company, so we are going to move them. There's no way to stay. But hey, by the way, would you like to merge?" And it was just a very matter of fact, quick thing that she said, by the way, at the end of their conversation. But it was something that we had discussed prior. And interestingly enough, that person said, I'm interested in actually shifting my business focus to fix and flips and other parts of real estate. I'd love to offload this to you guys." And so it ended up being an actual acquisition and not a merger. But the relationship that they had, the trust that was already built in, and just the alignment of interests, right? Really just stars aligned for us to be able to do it. And so it was just a really awesome thing that fell into our lap, but something that we had already mentally, thought about and planned for. Um, One of the biggest challenges in the whole acquisition process was the due diligence and just the entire process. I thought the due diligence would be quick. I thought it would be like, hey, you do due diligence on a house, you do it for 30 days, maybe 60 days max, and then you close on the house. And I thought it'd be similar, but this ended up being about a 3 to 4 month due diligence and transaction process, which, if I were to do it over again, because of the amount of work that's involved, I would have probably say like the next company that I acquire should have an extra zero at the end, because it'll be the same amount of work, right?
Hmm.
So instead of like a $500,000 acquisition, I might as well make it a 5 million, right? Because it's the same amount of work. I think that's something that like Brandon Turner says all the time with his mobile home parks. He's like, a 50 unit mobile home park might as well be a 500 because it's the same amount of work. And I feel like that's the same thing with acquisitions.
That's so interesting, man. And again, going back to that abundance or lack of abundance mindset when you're starting, you cannot possibly imagine how 500 might be the same work as 50 or as 5, because you think, oh,
Yeah.
5 sounds manageable, sounds doable. I can control 5. I can go and knock on 5 doors, but I cannot go and knock on 500, right? So do
Yeah.
you think, and I feel like there's opposite opinions on this. If you look at, let's say, real estate gurus out there, you've got like Robert Kiyosaki style mindset of like start small so that you can learn the business, and then you take it progressively. and that way you learn, you learn the business from the inside out as far as real estate investing goes. And then you've got the other extreme. You've got Grant Cardone. He's like, go 10x, just go get 100 units minimum as far as your first acquisition goes. Now that you've gone through that process, what would you say? Would you say start small? Would you say go big, right away?
I'm going to give you the answer that you already know. It depends, right? It depends on your level of
Sure.
risk tolerance and where you're at. If I'm early in my career and in real estate, if I'm doing real estate on the side and it's not my main hustle, if I, have certain things I need to stay risk averse, and maybe I don't have a certain operational expertise or business strategy expertise, then yes, learn it from the inside, start slow. But if you're kind of like, if you have a certain level of expertise or at least some level of experience after you've done a couple deals or whatnot, I would say there's nothing stopping you from 10xing. Like the only thing stopping you is your limiting beliefs, right? And so, why not? Why not go? Why not go all out? Why not leverage like crazy? Because at the end of the day, you're building wealth, and if you believe in your vision, right? If you um, understand that you are doing it with the right intentions and not cutting corners and not doing anything, stepping on anybody to get there, things will always work out. And so I think if you have that mindset of abundance and good intentions, and aloha, like we do here in Hawaii, that things will always work out. Absolutely.
That's amazing, man. I like that mindset a lot. I just want to point out, because some people might listen to this and think, oh, the mindset, oh, that sounds beautiful, but like, how can I change an outcome or whatever just through mindset? And I think there's different ways to look at it. You can look at it in a very esoterical way, and some people see it as such, and I think it makes sense for them, right? And then for those that are too like stuck on the logical mindset side of things, what I would say is that you can also see this in a logical way. I mean, for me, it really clicked too when I was told, like, when you do this exercise of like look around, count how many things you see that are like red or whatever color, right? And you look around, okay, 5 things are red, perfect. And now I look at you and I ask, okay, how many things around you are blue? It's like you have no idea because you were looking around for red things, right? And it's the
Exactly.
same thing when you buy a car and you just bought a new car and all of a sudden you go outside and you
You see
see
them
that
all over the
car
place.
everywhere. The car didn't just
Exactly.
appear, right? It didn't magically appear. It was there. It's just like the fact that it's now in your head makes you be aware of its existence. And I think it's the same way with goal setting, with visualization, with mindset. It's like, it's not that it magically necessarily just makes things fall into your life. It just makes you conscious so that you can see those opportunities and then go after them.
Exactly. It's increasing your overall awareness to all of the opportunities that are allowing you to get to that goal in unexpected ways, right? Like we, especially, just specifically talking about this acquisition, we didn't plan for this acquisition until maybe a year or two down the line, but we set the intention. And when it came across, it was like 6 months into us just starting the company, and we're like, "Well, this is it. We
Yeah.
got to go. Let's do it." And that's really how much it is. Very much about mindset.
And had you not set that intention, maybe they would have been having that conversation with the property manager, and they would have not thought of saying, "Oh, by the way, would you like to merge?" Like it would not have been a reflex.
100%. I can't tell you how many, like right now, another business that we're growing is just, our rehab and fix and flip business. And so many times I've talked to people who want to sell a property to us for us to fix and flip. And then because we let them know that we're doing as many of these as we can, there's oh, by the way, I have 3 more properties that I want to do. Like, great. And so, without putting those intentions out there, you'll never, have somebody understand what you're trying to do, or, have that energy kind of find its way to you. Um, yeah, it does. This probably does feel like a lot of fluff to people who very much are, right brained and thinking about logic. But I can't tell you how many I don't know any successful entrepreneur that has not gotten more spiritual throughout their entrepreneurship journey, because it is so much about the mindset, and that is, at the end of the day, the difference. You can get as
Mhm.
much knowledge with masterminds, and increase your network and increase your skills, and all of that. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the right mindset, you're not going to get through those tough times, and there will be plenty and plenty of tough times as an
Yeah.
entrepreneur.
No, exactly. And it seems like just the nature of entrepreneurship is spiritual slash esoterical slash, you know, don't get stuck on the term. The term doesn't matter, spiritual, esoterical, like that can mean so many things for so many people. But the
Sure.
idea that you're starting something that has an 80% failure rate, and yet here you are believing that it will go through, and like convincing other people that it will go through, and convincing yourself, like that in and of itself is a power that most people don't realize. But like if you're in business of any kind, like there's a power of belief there that most people don't have.
Yeah, and I think it's because there are some challenges, inevitable challenges that only you can overcome, right? If you build a team, they're not going to overcome certain challenges, right? And there are certain things that can sink your company or put you in a really, uh, you know, tough place. But it's you that has to overcome it, as the leader, as the entrepreneur, as the person that is, running the company. And so that's why mindset is so
Yeah.
critical.
What was the most challenging thing or eye-opening thing for you in terms of going from working at a W-2 job and in corporate America and in tech for so many years to like now it's your business, now everything depends on you kind of thing, especially in the early beginnings. Let's talk about the property management, vacation rental operations specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I think uh, growing in my product management career and becoming a director and senior director and managing people, you get to a certain point where you get really good at managing people, and kind of directing people on how to get things done without actually having to roll your sleeves up all the time to do it yourself.
Hmm.
Um, and then I find myself kicking off this, property management company, and I'm a solo operation for the first few months. So I'm doing everything from listing things on Airbnb, all the guest comms 24/7. I think my wife, and this was like, I launched in November of 2023. So it was like through the holidays, I'm just plugged in on my phone or laptop, because we got people checking in, and all different types of stuff going on. So the guest comms part was crazy. Doing all the bookkeeping myself for the first few months was crazy. And so just, having to not just understand and learn every part of the business, but actually be the only person, running it, being a solopreneur for a while, running that part of the company uh, that was humbling, but I wouldn't have it any other way, because now that we've been able to scale and grow, I understand all the nuances, right, of those areas that I need, my team to really focus on. So that was
Mm-hmm.
a huge piece, a
No,
huge
for sure.
transition.
I can totally see how, yeah, you grow to a level where you have a team under you, and you're still smart. You still know what needs to be done, and coaching, but you end up kind of delegating most of the actual execution, versus like you're starting out, you have no choice but to do the thing. And then I guess there's elements of this vacation rental industry that in a way make it easier. I don't want to say it's easy whatsoever, but like in the sense that, let's say, guests are reaching out to you, right? Like you have to reply. Like it's kind of like reactive kind of work.
There's no,
But then I
yeah,
think the challenge becomes, how do you manage the work that's reactive, that you have to handle, which is quote unquote easy to get to because it's getting in your face, like you have no choice but to
yes.
get it done. How do you manage that while also working on like the thinking long term, or the thinking where are we going here, which is kind of what you were, juggling with. You were being both the integrator and the visionary at the same time. So how did you
Yeah,
manage
yeah.
to do that? Did you give you say yourself like a day of the week where you'd be like, okay, this day I'm thinking, and this days I'm doing, or how did you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, for the first 2 to 3 months, it was just in the weeds, right at the ground level, doing it all, and so there was no time to take a step back and see the forest from the trees. But one of the things that my background as a product manager and really helped me with is that as a product manager working in tech, you have to work at multiple altitudes, right? So you have to be able to work at the ground level with the development team, understanding, how you need to build the technology and the ways to go about it. And then you have to be able to work at the middle altitude to be able to direct and guide and influence all the different people that don't report to you, but they need to work on this, initiative with you. And then you have to be at the highest level to sell that strategy and report on that strategy to senior executives. And so I have been comfortable with, based on my career, working at multiple altitudes and recognizing which altitude I'm at any given time. And so I knew the first 2 to 3 months I was just going to be in the weeds, and that I wasn't going to be able to do anything strategic or think about what we're going to do long term, but I just need to get the operational foundation set, and also our brand kind of set, with my tone, with how we, the personality in which we're interacting with people, and all the nuances there. And so I set that for the first 3 months, and then I knew after the first 3 months, it's time to start thinking about strategic planning for the next 6 to 12 months, which is something that we would always do with product management. And so pulled myself out of that after 3 months to think about some strategic planning, and that was how I started to figure out who on the team I needed to start, building towards, and who I needed to hire. And as I started to get my first few hires after 2 to 3 months, and putting them on guest comms, putting them on accounting and all the areas where those aren't my strengths, and the things that I can't don't have a lot of time to spend with, then I started to think bigger strategically with my business partners about what's the next big move, what does the next 6 to 12 to 18 months look like, how do we position this company amongst our personal, individual, and collective portfolios of companies and initiatives that we're working on. And so, yeah, I just think understand when you're in the weeds, understand when you're in the trees, and understand when you're looking at the forest, and get yourself at those different levels so that you can operate at each one
That's
effectively.
such an interesting analogy. The operating at different levels that you're talking about. Um, so it's basically, what I'm understanding is that you went at it with phases. Like you said, okay, I'm in a phase of like in the weeds, so I'm not even gonna feel stressed or anxious or whatever about not thinking strategically, because that's not the phase I'm at yet. Let me just get this out there. But I think the problem is staying there, like
Yeah,
staying there and not taking the time to eventually, because in a way, again, I'm not saying it's easy to be in the weeds. It's super hard, it's super stressful, but the work is coming at you. Versus strategic work, there's no work coming at you. You have to go find the work, you have to go create the thing, do the thing, think the thing, whatever that
absolutely.
is. So it's easy to stay in a place where the work is just coming at you, and just keep doing that forever. How did you know it was time to move on from that?
When different opportunities came up, to grow. For example, I had another property manager approach me when I was, in the weeds, and they were like, "Hey, um, is there an opportunity for us to collaborate where we can, potentially share leads, or, we kind of merge some of our services together to grow together?" And I couldn't even entertain it, right? And so when you find yourself so deep in the weeds that you cannot entertain other growth opportunities, then that there's an opportunity cost to you staying in the weeds. And that should be the signal that you need to move out, from that altitude to a higher altitude, at least for a certain amount of time. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's healthy to pop up and down every once in a while. But if there's opportunities that you are having to pass up because you don't have enough time, then you should probably sit back and reflect and think, why am I not thinking about growth and at least entertaining these opportunities? And it's probably because you're bogged down in the weeds too much.
Mm. And I'm sure the opposite is also true, as in, like, you cannot be entertaining every single possibility of growth, because then you're never doing the work, and you're just thinking about the next, fancy toy, or the next, fancy project to start.
Yeah, I did find myself doing that just about a month ago, actually, because it was annual strategic planning time in my head, and so I had a good, conversation with my business partner, my business partners, and talked about these are all the different opportunities we have in front of us, and can we, effectively go after all of them at the same time? And so another tactic from my past with product management was, can we kind of score the ROI and the effort and how this fits into the entire portfolio of things we're doing, and rate each one of these opportunities and then prioritize those opportunities based on our time and how we want to plan out our roadmap. And
Mm.
so I think road mapping is a really important thing to think, exercise to do, as far as like, what does the next 4 to 8 quarters look like, and how do you break up those quarters into different initiatives and prioritize the growth opportunities throughout. At least have a roadmap, a general roadmap of how things are going to play out, so that you can prioritize your time. Because I kind of had the shiny penny syndrome just about a month ago, and my business partners had to kind of pull me down to earth and say, all right, let's just focus on these 2 opportunities
Mm.
versus the 10 that I wanted to go after.
That's interesting, man. And
So it's
and just
great to
one.
have good partners.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm
Yeah.
curious there, because you mentioned in the product management, you guys do planning 4 quarters to how many quarters in advance? You said 4 to.
Yeah, I'd like to think that, depending on the company, you can plan kind of 12 to 18 months in advance, right? A lot of people, a lot of corporations like to do 3 to 5 year plans, but it's funny how those 3 to 5 year plans change every year.
That's
So
what I
it's
was
very,
gonna ask. Like, it's because it's hard to plan very much in advance, especially harder in a startup business environment. So, given that you come from a background of so much long-term strategic thinking, how have you adapted your thinking process, or your planning process? Like, do you still plan for your business for the next 18 months? Do you plan for the, just like, okay, what's the priority for the quarter? I've heard people talk about 12 weeks. Just let's focus on what's the next 6 weeks. What's it for you?
I think 6 months is a good time horizon to plan for. Knowing how the next 12 to 18 months could play out,
Yeah.
based on the long term vision, and then having the next 6 months pretty crystal clear, with tons of room for wiggle room and pivoting depending on opportunities that come up. But we do have the next 6 months fairly clear in our heads, and we do know how that is going to potentially play in months 7 through 12. But I don't think in an entrepreneurship environment, it's really hard to plan further than 6 months, tactically and strategically.
And even 6 months, it's like, okay, what's the structure of a strategic plan for 6 months? Are you looking at one priority? Because there's also that book, right? The one thing. What's the one thing that could make everything else easier or necessary? So are you focusing on, like, what's the one thing we want to accomplish over the next 6 months? Are you breaking it down into, like, kind of like deliverables or milestones along the way? What's your take?
Yeah, I like to have about three, right? I like to have one primary goal of something that we're working on, and then, two additional things that support that or help potentially, grow other areas that we want to focus on, right? So, for example, for the first 6 months of this year, we really want to, because we just finished the acquisition of our property management company, we really just want to hone in on our new operation, right? So, as much as people say you're acquiring and you're merging operations, you're basically starting a whole operation from scratch. And so, our focus is to make this operation as optimized and efficient as possible over the first 6 months of the year. so that we can organically grow. And so that one of our second goals is organic growth here in the Hawaii area because of the influence of my business partners, because of the reputation that we're having here in Hawaii. And then the third is for us to dabble in the midterm rental space here and see how that can grow too based on our relationships here. And so those are kind of our three main goals here for the company. And then my business partners and we've got some other ventures that we're doing as well. And we know that one of them is a primary goal, and we've got a couple others that we know that can grow as well.
So when you go from, let's say, 10, 20 properties to 60, from one day to the next, almost, like that's a big change in pretty much everything. So how have you guys been approaching that sudden growth? Like, in other words, was it more than you were expecting once you saw the volume of the work hit you, or was it kind of like, yeah? How have you been handling that sudden increase from just 10, 20 properties to 60, all of a sudden?
The biggest shocker for me was the volume of transactions, right? And so, like, bookkeeping is not my forte. And glad we have a bookkeeping team and one in-house bookkeeper. But the volume of transactions, if you we're going from 10, 20 properties to 50 to 60, and they've got 10 to 50 transactions per month. It's just so much to keep track of. So that was overwhelming for a while, but we really got our bookkeeping in place. And then I think the thing for me where I said, okay, I need to sit at the middle altitude. The middle altitude for me was like, how do we get the right organizational structure in place? Right. So we're in multiple markets. So Hawaii is a big market for us. But then through the acquisition, we expanded to California. We had some in Florida, but we actually expanded more in Florida. And then, a couple of onesie twosies in Texas and Arizona. And so structure wise, and this is also where some of the background comes into play, is I like to think of things as like, okay, do I want to structure the team as horizontal shared services, right? To where we have everybody takes care of all the properties and everyone does comms. And then you have somebody that is, focusing on cleaning, and someone's focusing on maintenance, and someone's focusing on bookkeeping for all the properties. Or does it also make sense to have some verticals, right? Where you have some people that have specialization in different regions. And so what we ended up doing was a little bit of a mix, where we have now 3 regions, and we have regional leads for each region. So we have one Hawaii regional lead, we have one California regional lead, and one Florida/Texas, Arizona regional lead. And those people, when we talk about hospitality, they're the ones that really get deep into, understanding the property, the market, right? They're handling, revenue management. They're understanding when there's, seasonal events, and those different markets. They're understanding if there's an influx of different types of people coming in for either vacations or events, or even if there's like a new contract in place where there's going to be a lot of traveling, nurses and stuff like that. So the regional leads are the ones that really focus in and understand those regions, and then they have the support of some shared services. So we do have, some people that are still focusing on ensuring like the routine maintenance is done, so they handle that, which is very much like a wide operation. We have a shared service for bookkeeping, and then we do have people that that also help with guest communication. So scaling is really where I said this is where the organization structure is going to come into place, where we can get people to understand their roles and understand where there's going to be specialization and also shared services.
That's interesting, man. And when do you know that it makes sense to have vertical versus horizontal, org structures? When you were thinking about it, how are you approaching that decision making? And are there cases where you think a horizontal approach makes more sense, and cases where you think like adding more depth in the org chart makes more sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've talked to so many operators who trying to figure out how to set up their org, and everyone says it's different, right? Every case is different. For my specific company, when we rolled out with everybody just at the horizontal level, and everyone had expertise in every property. I started to observe, and in the first few weeks, I noticed that some things were getting missed. Right, so like not everybody understood all the nuances of the market. Not everybody can tell me when there was events happening. Not everybody can tell me when there was a weather something weather related happening, and we should check in on guests, right? And so I noticed that there were some pain points and some things that we were missing from a hospitality perspective. A 4-star review comes in, or there's a 3-star review comes in. It really triggers you, right? And you're like, all right, what is happening?
Mm.
And so so those are the things that really like triggered me to say, all right, well, there seems like we don't have certain specialization. We're missing some areas, and we need to have specialization in each region. So for
Mm.
my company, it made sense because we had groups of properties that I can put in regions that kind of made sense for us to have that specialization.
And in terms of which functions you keep centralized, like you mentioned, bookkeeping, you shared resources like that. I guess it's the areas or the functions where you think there's more of a technicality component to it, where you think it might be harder to get, experts at a regional level for, let's say, bookkeeping, or how do you think about what to centralize?
Centralizing, I think of it as like, how can you make something like operational and more efficient, that doesn't really impact the guest experience directly, right? So like we have routine maintenance that is a shared service. That is scheduling. That is managing a complex schedule of pest control and pool services and AC, all the things that you have to do. And so that can scale across, right? You don't have to have a specialization in the area specifically to be able to do that, right? Guest comms is always going to be something that's going to be shared because we just need to have coverage. But when it even comes to cleaners, right? When we're managing with cleaners, there's an operational component to managing cleaners that feels like it could be shared. Bookkeeping as well. So if it's something that you don't need a specialization of a specific area, it feels like it can be operationalized, and that's what worked for my company. It could be wrong for other companies, but it seems to be working out for us so far.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, what about from a tech stack perspective? PMS migrations are one of the biggest nightmares. I don't know if you had to deal with that when you acquired the operation there, or what?
We did. Yeah, 100%.
How did you deal with
we
that, man? What did you learn there?
It was scary. When you move from one PMS to another, you're just crossing your fingers, hoping that your automated messages don't get messed up, your listings don't go out of whack, your price labs, and all your pricing doesn't get messed up, doesn't hurt your business. Um, so we had a mini transition plan. We were on one PMS that was amazing for 15 units, 20 units, but when you get to a scale of 50 to 60, there's other types of functions you need. So we switched to another PMS, and we probably took about 3 weeks to prep for it. Just getting all of our messaging in place. Luckily, and one of the reasons why we acquired the company we did was because we wanted to acquire the knowledge of that of those people to ensure that that they know those systems better, and as we transition from our systems to theirs, that it would be a little less a little more seamless. But yes, the PMS specifically was challenging. Even merging some of our pricing tools, was also made us hold our breath too. But at the end of the day, you just got to make the jump, and that it's going to be best for your business.
Mm-hmm. And if you were to do a PMS migration again, is there anything you would do differently?
I don't think so. I think we actually managed it fairly well. We missed a couple things. There were a few messages that went haywire, or some things that didn't really fire off the way we wanted it to. But very happy with the new
Good.
PMS that we're on. And
I think it can get complex. Sorry to interrupt. It can get complex when you have a
Sure.
lot of transactions tool as far as like reservations where there's Stripe involved, and where are you at? Did you collect the whole thing? Did you just collect the first part? And that can get scary quickly.
Absolutely, absolutely. There was probably a little bit of leakage in there. We probably missed a few $100s here or there with some things, but we kept track of the messages of all of the transactions fairly closely and monitored them well during the transition.
So now that you're familiar with all the ecosystem of tools that make a vacation rental tech stack, there's a lot, right? There's a lot of tools. There's PMS, dynamic pricing, market data, guest experience portal, fraud prevention, chargeback prevention, listing optimization. I mean, the list goes on and on. Data visualization. So you can easily end up with like 20 different tools, right, connected to your PMS. But I'm curious to know, what is a tool that you haven't found? What is a solution, a tool, a vendor that, like, given your background in as a product manager, you must think, okay, there's something here that is missing. Has anything caught your eye yet, as far as like, how come PMSs don't have this, or how come there's no tool that does this one thing? What comes to mind?
So so I would say automated owner reports. And I say that because we created and I did a mock-up of what the ideal owner report would be. I'm an owner myself with some of these properties. This is all the information that I want to see. And we made the mock-up and I handed it to the team. I said, let's make this happen. And it became a very, very manual report, right?
Mm.
It was like pulling data from the PMS, from our, QuickBooks, from all the different, like 4 or 5 different data sources, to create this robust owner report. But that's the level of customer service that we wanted to provide to our owners, to where we're giving them all the transparency about how many bookings they had, what bookings they have coming up, what revenue they made, what the breakdown was of all of their, all the transactions. What's a summary of the market? What does the market look like? And what's a summary of all of the maintenance and cleaning and any issues that came up? And what are some of our recommendations that we want you to think about over the next, next month or the next couple months, as we want to improve the property? These are all things that I don't see a tool doing. A lot of the PMSs or financial tools out there will give you like a financial report, but it
Mhm.
doesn't include some market, data. It doesn't, include some of those things. And so that's been a struggle for us, kind of pulling together an efficient owner report, for us to be able to effectively communicate what we want to communicate, and not just financials. At the end of the day, owners want to know: are my bills paid? Am I making money? And am I providing a great experience? Cool. But there's so much more to it. And I think as a product manager, building out robust reports is how we would always
Mhm.
report progress. We'd always measure how we're doing, understand where we can improve and optimize. And so I haven't found that tool out there. If you know of any, I'd be happy to look into them further. And yeah, that's the main one that sticks out to me right now.
Funny enough, sounds like something we built at Angel Host, because we also couldn't find anything on the on the PMS side. We looked at Guesty, we looked at Hostaway, we looked at Track, we looked at quite a few, and we were using Guesty, and it was a good owners portal, but it was more so a calendar. And we were like, yeah, but what about the data visualization? What about the benchmarking, performance versus the market, whatnot? We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We would rather have a PMS build it for us and just use it.
Yep.
But
Yep.
we didn't see that happen, and we ended up having to build our own. So I asked the question, oftentimes thinking, is there something else that we haven't identified that it could make sense to build? But I'll show you what we've got in terms of the owner's dashboard.
Well, let's share your screen. Let's turn this into an Angel Host demo. I'm down.
No,
Just
no, no,
kidding.
no, no. Let's not get it into a demo, but we can chat afterwards, and
Happy
definitely
to.
interested in showing you what we've got. But listen, Jason, this has been very fun, very insightful. Any closing thoughts as far as advice that you would give to operators that are also trying to scale, that are also trying to maybe get into the investment world? as well. Any final thoughts of wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience here?
I think, a lot of operators have different goals. A lot of operators that I talk to want to grow, right? I think one of the things that's important to really understand is the reason for your growth and what that plan really looks like. For example, this acquisition that we did, when we went from 20 properties to 60, it was not an acquisition for profit and for more cash flow in our business. This was an acquisition that was going to scale our operation in
Mm,
order to set us up for the next acquisition, right? So we knew that, doing this acquisition, we are going to get a really good team of people who understood what they were doing. They understood how to operate at scale, and they could, pass that expertise to us. We understood that we had certain things that we could bring to the table, and certain expertise and different style in our brand and everything. And so, with that goal in mind, we did not have the expectations of crazy cash flow after this, right? It was a stepping stone to the next acquisition. And I think,
mm,
if you have that in mind and you know what your next 12 to 18 months can look like, so you can make those moves in the next 6 months, it's going to be important. So I think, understand your vision for the next 12 to 18 months and be crystal clear on what the next 3 to 6 months looks like, and how the moves you make today are going to, have that trickle effect for your longer vision and roadmap
hmm.
beyond.
And I like what you said too. Right on. By the way, as far as like why grow? Why do you want to grow? Right? Like I think being intentional is important because some people are very happy with the idea of maintaining a boutique operation, focusing on high end, focusing on luxury. There's no need to grow. But then, there's people that want to grow just because that idea sounds sexy of just growing. But it's like, okay, but like, why? Why? And then if you
Yeah,
have a solid why, okay, well, guess what? This is our vision. This is the kind of legacy we want to build. Like, this is the kind of service we want to provide, and we cannot afford that kind of service at this volume. We need more properties to afford to bring in these hires and afford to bring the operation to this standard, whatever. Now
100%.
you have a reason, but not just doing the thing just because that's what you're supposed to do, I think is what it comes down to.
100%.
Love it, man. Love it. Well, listen, Jason, this has been great. Thank you so much. Where can people, by the way, where can people stay in touch? Where can people connect? Where can people listen into to your podcast as well?
Follow my company's IG at Collective Stays, and you can follow me personally at Jason Samson Solutions, and you can kind of get connected to some of my other activities there with real estate and my podcast as well.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. It was great to have you on.
Thank you so much, Sebastian.